for this lesson, you're going to create your own value scale, and you're going to focus on getting the correct values and very smooth shading. Remember, no smudging, no drawing with lines, or you're going to have to redo it. If you make mistakes, you can draw boxes all over this paper or the back of this paper, and you can try other attempts. So if you mess up value 1, you can draw a box right here and then retry value 1 again. So don't be too scared about messing up on this. In the end, we want to have nice, consistent values going out throughout our value scale. You can use your number 2 pencil for value 1 only. If you use it for anything darker than this, it turns to a gray and it doesn't look good in the end. We want to be able to get completely to black, and so we don't want any grayness on our paper. So you can use a number 2 pencil for value 1 if you need to. Try to not use that though if possible. You're going to use an ebony pencil for most of this project. So this is an art pencil created by Prismacolor. The nice thing about this pencil is it's versatile. So it gets really, really dark, and with practice, you can shade very lightly with it. So value 5 is going to be completely black. I want you to do that one last because it smudges. But just so you can see what that would look like, there shouldn't be any little specks in the paper. And you're going to get completely covered with this ebony pencil material. You can shade value 5 in lines because it's all going to just be black anyway. So don't worry about shading the circles or any of the techniques for this box. Again, save this to the very end so that it doesn't smudge across all the rest of the values. This is going to be nothing, so this one is done for you. And then you're going to go super light, and then a little darker, and a little bit darker. You want to remember your good techniques from the How to Shade worksheet. You want to have a separator paper underneath your hand. Even if there is nothing here, you want to have a separator paper because your hand leaks oil. And so let's say that your hand was sitting here for a very long time. That oil is going to build up, and when you shade in that area, it's going to have a different texture, a different sheen. It might look smudged, and so just keep your hands off your paper the whole entire time. I'm going to start this demonstration by doing a value 2. I suggest you start with value 2 instead of 1 because you want to have a little practice before you try to get even lighter. So I can shade in the line pattern up next to the edge of something because if I'm doing a scribbly pattern, it's going to be hard for me to keep a nice edge. I am using an ebony pencil for this. If you're having a hard time keeping a light value, then you can hold the pencil farther away. Remember, it has a tendency of getting darker if I'm holding it up close. You can also have your hand on top of another hand to get a high angle. Just whatever techniques you need to do to keep this to be pretty light. I would try in this box, I would attempt a value 1, and then if it ends up looking good, then we can cross that out and say that's your value 1. So this is about how dark a value 2 is. Notice how I changed my technique and I'm going back and forth around that edge, and then I snap back into my circles. I stay in this area until it's all nice and smooth. Then I work my way out in a random direction, and then I come back and revisit. A random direction, and then I come back and revisit. And then I'm going to cross over. So just trying to get a web. The idea of if all of a sudden, and I'm working really small, like this circly pattern about the size of an ant, if I accidentally had a harder pressure, it would look like a blemish in the skin instead of a pattern showing up. That would draw your attention to it. So again, kind of going back and forth here to keep my edge nice and clean. Craftsmanship is going to be graded on this. And then I go out and I revisit. Notice how when I'm going out and revisiting, I don't have this straight border. If I was to shade in rows and then come back and try to shade again, it's going to be hard for me to blend out that border. So an irregular end, and you're going to really take your time on this. I would say you're new at this, so maybe it's going to take you guys at least 5 minutes, 10 minutes per box. If you're getting it done in just a few seconds, then you're not building the proper technique. Right now, you're using muscles in a way that you probably haven't used them before. And so you're building up these good habits with your muscles, your control of your hand. And so if you're not doing the correct technique, you're not going to be building up that correct movement. For number 1 value, I prefer that you use an ebony pencil and attempt to do that. But if you can't get lighter than your value 2, you can't get light enough for a value 1, then you can use a number 2 pencil for that value only. You could try at first with your ebony pencil, and then if you don't succeed, you can draw another box underneath and use your number 2 pencil. I want you to remember how the techniques or the tips on how to shade light. If we go back to our how to shade worksheet, hold the paper up in the air so when you shade, it doesn't have a lot of pushback. Crinkle up a sheet of paper and put it underneath your worksheet. Hold the pencil at a high angle but far, far back so that you don't have a lot of pressure on your hand. So you can use one of these techniques, you can use a combination of 2 of these techniques. Just make sure that your pencil is sharp and that you're able to get super light. A lot of times I'll have students try to practice off in the corner to try to get that light value before they attempt it here, but that is totally up to you. So I'm going to use the technique of holding the paper up in the air to try to stay super light. And I have my pencil, I'm holding it at the very back. And it is at a high angle to the paper. And then I am going to just kind of let that lack of pressure do the work. And this one is going to probably be pretty time consuming compared to the rest. What you're doing right now is you're figuring out what pressure to push in order to get what values. And that's going to take hand-eye coordination, it's going to take muscle memory, so just keep practicing until you're able to shade smoothly. If you're sitting there in class waiting for another class to start, just take your pencil and try to practice shading so that you build up that muscle memory. So you'll continue doing that, get it nice and smooth. Remember, you can shade in lines next to the edge, but then snap back into that circle or scribbly pattern. You're revisiting and then coming back out. You're revisiting and then coming back out. I already have the other examples done for you on this worksheet. And so you are going super light as you possibly can, a little darker, darker, darker. And then I want to show you this value 5. You are going to press so hard on value 5 that you don't see any of these specks showing through. Remember, you don't have to shade in that circle technique for this. You can shade back and forth in lines, but you can't have any of these little pinhole pieces showing through. Hopefully you save this to the last because it is very smudgy when you're applying it this thick. But get rid of all of those little tiny specks of light to get this one done. Turn it, try to shade inside the lines. So let's now look at some student examples so you know how to aim for A quality work. So these both are A quality, even though there are some white grooves from whatever they were drawing on top. This is a workbook, it's not a final artwork, and that's just something, if that shows up on yours, to be aware of. I'm not going to mark you down for white grooves inside of your workbook, but if yours looks like this, then you know that you have that A quality. Let's look at some more examples. So this is an example of a student that just rushed to try to get something done. This is not going to be worth any points. This has nothing to do with the techniques that were taught. So don't rush through, don't shade with lines. Here is where he drew underneath and attempted to slow down. So he has a bunch of these boxes everywhere in his second attempt. He did pretty good. The only thing is his circles turned a little bit into ovals because you can start to see a pattern going back and forth. And he just needed to stay in one area long enough to get rid of these white grooves or these white spots. Here's what the texture will look like if your pencil is too dull or you're holding it on its side. So you can see actually the width of the pencil, but you can see how it gets darker on the top parts of the paper and then those white pits don't ever get shaded in. So hold your pencil at a high angle. This is the same scenario where the pencil is too low. And the pencil again is too low. And you see the white groove. Again, I'm not taking off points, but just be aware of that. We don't want that happening on our projects. And here's another example where the pencil was too low, where it's really blotchy and it's not getting into those cracks. The pencil's too low and they started shading in lines. They smudged. And so this is what I'm talking about. You may get tempted to do this, but don't. I won't grade it. It just ends up looking really splotchy and dirty, and so don't ever smudge. Here's a good example of the student was doing the technique right. They just weren't staying in an area long enough to get it smooth. And so that's why you have all of these gaps, not from it being shaded on the side of the pencil, but just because they just needed to stay there a little bit longer before they left and then go back and revisit. So that's it. Make sure that you study and use the techniques that are on the shading worksheet and you go very slow. You end up getting done quicker because you don't have to redo anything. And that is it for this tutorial.